Would you like to go next, Douglas?
I'm happy to go next on the issue at stake, which is whether or not the political parties are bankrupt.
I know it's a hard act to follow. But
in short, I could just say yes and turn off the mic. It seems to me manifestly obvious that our political parties are bankrupt, much like, and I'd agree with this with Nick on this, much like much of our press. The press and our political parties seem to me to be intent on maintaining a consensus against all opposition, any opinions to the contrary, any outside opinion. I'd give you several examples. It strikes me that our political parties are, for instance, entirely united on the issue of immigration. The only difference between them is that the Labour Party occasionally sends some poor fool like Phil Woolas out to talk tough and not do anything. And the Tory Party can't even do that. So fearful is it of touching the issue. The same thing happens with both our political parties in relation, for instance, to Europe. One of the issues which has most effect now, an increasingly large effect, on our everyday lives in terms of legislation, expense, and all of these sort of things. What do we have? We have two political parties who've decided that the debate is over. And if you come along and say, well, actually, I've got a different opinion about this, you're pushed to the far margins. They say, actually, guys, that debate is over. When were we asked about it? You say, well, you had your chance. Well, I was born in 1979. I never had a chance to say anything on that one. But the decision has been made for you. And this is a decision that the two main parties acquiesce in. There's almost no point, I think, on talking about the Liberal Party. I think one of the an exercise in futility. But the same thing happens with taxes. It is now as sure that your taxes will continue to rise under either main party as it is that one day you'll die. The economic crisis has shown this consensus up. We get the politicians we deserve. The Tory party, meant to be a party of opposition, has, instead of preparing for government, prepared for a photo shoot. It has decided to line up a group of inexperienced young men to get rid of anyone with any experience, and then with a sudden panic has brought back Ken Clarke. It's brought back Ken Clarke almost single-handedly to outweigh the balance. I mean this in a political sense, I understand. And a physical one. But to weigh this back, and you say, well, why did you have to do this? It was because you got the most grossly inexperienced person to be your shadow chancellor, who didn't have the opportunity or the ability to question when he should have questioned, and who now has to be, as it were, personally bailed out. We see this from our government as well. Just to give you one example that I've been involved in recent weeks, Jackie Smith and David Miliband acquiesced in the banning from this country of an elected Dutch politician, Geert Wilders, for no crime. For nothing that I see as a crime in this country, except that one thug Labour peer, Lord Ahmed of Hit and Run, decides to threaten, I think probably for the first time in centuries, a peer threatens Black Rod with a rioting crowd outside the House of Lords. A disgrace to our democratic process, a disgrace to it. And what happens? Jackie Smith says, well, the man who you were going to riot against must be the problem. This is a government and an opposition that can't tell the difference between a firefighter and a fire, between a firefighter and an arsonist in that case. And what does Mr. Miliband say is the reason? He says, we have to keep this man out. I haven't actually seen the film myself, but people tell me it's a bad film, and therefore you get kept out of Britain for making a bad film, apparently now. I hope Ken Loach gets exiled. And we have David Miliband coming out with, could you get a phrase that would have embarrassed George Orwell more than the following? David Miliband said, we are a government that passionately believes in freedom of speech, but you don't have the right to shout fire in a crowded theatre. And nobody pointed out that actually you do have a right. What you don't have a right to do is to falsely shout fire in a crowded theatre. But Mr. Miliband decided that even if you were standing in a theatre, and even if it were on fire, which I submit in relation to Islamic extremism we are, you wouldn't have the right to shout fire. You should all just acquiesce in a little silence and not cause any embarrassment and all just burn to death. And meanwhile, the British government has to be reminded, my organisation and others, that they're about to let in, as they were, and have thankfully barred him under pressure from us, the spokesman for an organisation, a terrorist organisation, which is not only inciting violence, but allowing a spokesman whose job is to incite violence, who could be sacked if he weren't inciting violence at any one moment, and whose organization is currently attempting to kill people and is killing people. That man's okay to come in. And what happens with the consensus across the parties? That was the attitude in the Labour Party and the Conservative Party. Keep Wilders out, but Moussaoui, nobody had asked the question. Nobody had asked the question. I'll wrap up, but I mean, it strikes me as being maybe a time which I have to say, you shouldn't really say that you're sort of looking forward to a recession. But I think there are some optimistic things to take from this, which is I think this recession is going to make us serious again as a country and as a culture, and ask again some of the questions we should have been asking long ago. That is not just to do with economics, but to do with our home affairs, our foreign affairs. I much resent the fact that the Conservatives are actually just going to inherit office.
Thank you.